Okay, so I've been reading this book, Pleasure, by Alexander Lowen. He's talking about the ego versus the body, essentially, and how ego is sort of a self-conscious, self-identifying force, but pleasure is known largely through the body. And he gives this analogy that I thought was really, really interesting. So he says, every ego identification is a form of self-expression. The person in our first example who bought a large house is saying to the world, look, I am the owner of this house. I am identified with it. However, it is only his ego that is identified with the house unless the person himself has taken an active part in the design or construction of the house. Later, he goes on to say, problems arise when a person becomes overextended. That is, when his ego identifications compensate for a lack of self-identification. In a healthy person, the ego is grounded in the feelings of the body and identified with the bodily self. When the identification with the body is weak and tenuous, a person's identity is vague, and his self-expression in creative living is greatly reduced. As I was thinking about this chapter of ego identification, it suddenly struck me, this is what class is for. Bit of a hypocrite right now because I'm not in class, but I loved his analogy of the house and how if you buy a house, but you're not involved in the making of the house, there's sort of this limited sense of pleasure, this limited sense of bodily identification with the house. I think that kind of thing can be created by taking care of the house over time, like you build a physical relationship with the house. But I think when it comes to acting, there's so much business happening. Like there's so much actors have to do that is business oriented and sort of transactional and like submit and fill this form out and pay this money and all that kind of stuff. And I think that class is this incredible way to make the house, to build the house, and to be more engaged in the craft and what we might consider like the bodily pleasure of acting, the practice of acting, than the sort of transactional, now I own the house part of acting. And that being said, I also think that it's possible to be so engaged with the art of living and maybe the art of entertainment itself that class maybe does take a back seat, as it is for me now. I am making films at the moment and I'm quite busy. I feel actively engaged in the craftsmanship. I feel actively engaged in the making of it. And so it became necessary and valuable for me to take a break from class. I also thought it was interesting to think about in this particular example of the person who owns the house and identifies with something that they haven't built, and how it can become this sort of over-leveraged ego sensibility. How easy it is for me to over-identify with something regardless of my input into it. I mean, he gives the example of sports fans as well, and how you're not playing on the team, but you identify with the team. We won the championship. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does lack a certain bodily satisfaction in the sense that you're not efforting to win the championship. And so I do think that there is this ability in this industry to get over-identified with the product and under-identified with the practice, with the bodily function of creating art. I wonder too if it is a little different. You know, we see a lot of bigger name actors becoming producers and EPs on projects. I'm not saying being an actor is not enough. Being an actor is enough, and you're super engaged in the craftsmanship and the creation of the process. But I can also see for these actors who move into production and move into EP work that it feels good to be a little bit more baked into the DNA, into the foundation of the house. As an actor, I think, to continue the analogy of the house, it's like, you know, we may paint the outside of the house, but that may feel like we're less engaged with the overall process of building. And so wanting to be involved a little bit more in the foundational process or the design, the blueprints, whatever, makes a lot of sense to me. Both are involved in the craftsmanship of the homes. Yeah, I do think that there's something to be said about class connecting you to the making of a thing, to the practice, the bodily practice of creation, and producing, EPing, being behind the scenes on projects, also helping you engage with the bodily practice of just like doing and making. Both are important. Like identifying as an actor, your ego identifying as an actor or an artist is important, but your body actually going through the process of being an actor is equally important, if not more so. And you need those two, is what he's saying, to have a well-rounded experience. Otherwise, you can over-leverage into the ego and become quite a nightmare to deal with. I don't know what the flip side of that is, so maybe we'll find out in another chapter.